In many ways, the grid is the backbone of the energy transition in the region. So it determines how fast renewable energy can be integrated, how resilient the system is, and how effectively the countries can participate in cross-border power chain. So if we're talking about urgency, then strengthening the grid infrastructure is absolutely foundational.
Yeah, I also think that most importantly, grid development need to keep pace with the development plans. We see that planned network development in a number of countries, not only in Asia, but Europe too, are out of step with energy ambitions.
Welcome to Asia Climate Finance, your front row seat to the policies, investments, and actors shaping climate business and finance across Asia Pacific. Subscribe now so others find this essential guide to Asia's climate economy, and note the disclaimers at the end. Now over to the host, analyst, investor, and author, Joseph Jacobelli.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be listening from. Welcome to Asia Climate Finance. By sheer coincidence, last week, we discussed a great climate finance-related report by Joe Richardson of the Anthropocene Fixed Income Institute, and today we are discussing another great report. We are exploring the immense challenge of funding Southeast Asia's green transition. The region needs more than $280 billion every year to meet its goals. That is a staggering amount of capital to mobilize. Joining me to discuss how to bridge this gap are two experts from the global energy think tank Ember. Dr. Dinita Setywati and Alnie Demoral use data to spark action among decision makers across the globe. Dinita brings a unique perspective from her background in disaster relief and her extensive research on the Indonesian transition. Alnie offers deep industry insight, having moved from the oil and gas sector to working with electric cooperatives in the Philippines. We discussed the latest report on leveraging global capital as ASEAN prepares for critical upcoming summits. We explore why the power grid is the essential backbone of the energy transition and how it determines the speed of renewable integration. We also examine the different financing models from China, Japan, and the US, and how ASEAN can manage that while building resilience. From cross-border power grids to the urgent need for a multidisciplinary approach to education, this episode maps out the roadmap for a cleaner future in Asia. Please do send us your comments or ideas to the email address mentioned at the top of the show notes, as always, and please enjoy the show. Hello, Alnie and Dinita. How are you guys? How are you, Dinita? You're in Jakarta, right?
Yes, I'm in Jakarta. It's nice and sunny here, Jakarta, Joseph.
Oh, nice. I can't say the same about Hong Kong. It's been pretty horrible weather. How about yourself, Alnie? How's Manila?
Yeah, similar here. It's been sunny this day, kind of now.
Okay, I'm obviously in the wrong place then. I should have gone to Jakarta or Manila, although Manila is only an hour flight. Well, listen, first of all, allow me to really thank you guys for participating in Asia Climate Finance. It's really great to have you and to have your insights. So thank you so much, Dinita and Alnie.
Yes, you're welcome. The pleasure is all us.
So maybe to start, do you think that each of you could possibly share just a little bit about maybe your background beyond the show notes, because the show notes will have your bio, including how you became involved in clean energy?
Yes, so I started with working in evacuating tsunami victims in Palu, and I saw that electricity has been cut off for several days. So from here on, I wanted to work on energy and propose solutions, how clean energy can be a better solution than fossils. And so Ember happens, and I've been working with Ember for the past 2 years, and very happy to be here.
Great, Alnie? Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I actually started my career in oil and gas industry. So energy has always been my space. But over time, as more research and conversation around climate impact started emerging, I found myself really wanting to understand what that means for the sector that I'm in. So I think what really solidified it for me was when I began working with electric cooperatives in the Philippines. You really see how powerful electricity is, how it enables livelihood, and But at the same time, you also got to question where is that electricity is coming from. And that's when it clicked for me. If energy is this powerful enabler, then it also has to be sourced somewhere responsibly and in a way that it doesn't like further harm the communities it's supposed to uplift, especially the most vulnerable one.
That's very interesting background. Both of you, Dinita and Alnie. Maybe it would be great if you could possibly very briefly introduce Ember. I mean, we had Ember on before, but just for those who did not listen to that particular episode, maybe just very quick introduction.
Yes, of course. So Ember is a global energy think tank that use data to build clean energy narrative and ignite action from decision makers. And we have teams across Europe, Asia, and Latin America.
Great. That's very focused and very brief. Thanks. Now, we're chatting today because I found that your report was particularly interesting because we've been preparing a little bit for this. Now, I'm referring to leveraging global capital towards clean energy as ASEAN races to the summit. Can I ask you guys, what was the motivation that led you to write this kind of policy paper on ASEAN's energy financing?
Well, first of all, thank you for the interest, Joseph. So the motivation really came from the timing and the urgency. With most countries having submitted their NDC 3.0 and the APAEC targets reinforcing higher clean energy ambition for the region, there is a clear signal that countries really wants to move faster in their transition. But the ambition alone doesn't build power plants or transmission lines, right? It's the financing that do that. And while the investment gap has always been part of the narrative, we felt that the conversation was getting stuck there. Everyone agrees there is a gap. But the more interesting question actually is how could we be more strategic in mobilizing and deploying that external capital available to the region, to us? So with the ASEAN summit coming up, we saw a timely opportunity to contribute something practical to the discussion, not just highlighting the financial need, but proposing ways that the region can be more deliberate and coordinated in leveraging the global capital towards clean energy.
Maybe, Alnie, you want to clarify for those who are not as familiar with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations about what the summit is all about?
So the Association of Southeast Asian Nations consists of 11 countries that are located in Southeast Asia. And collectively, we have an energy target outlined in our APAEC, which is the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. And this heightened ambition not requires, but presents the commitment for those 11 countries to really move forward with the energy transition and clean energy deployment in the region collectively as an entire cluster.
And there's an annual meeting of both the leadership and also the individual ministries, like the various ministries related to energy and ministries related to finance, etc. Great. Just highlighting that for those not that familiar with this. Now, talking about money, because we are talking about financing after all. Now, your report, I think, highlights a massive annual investment requirement of over $280 billion in ASEAN by 2035. Again, that's annual. What specific infrastructure categories demands the kind of most urgent capital right now?
Yeah, I believe that's an important question to be tackled. So what we see is that while priorities do vary from countries to country across ASEAN, the most urgent capital need right now is the grid infrastructure. Because without a stronger and more modernized grid, it is difficult to scale up clean energy or even meet the rapidly growing electricity demand of the country. We can build generation capacity relatively quickly, but if the grid can't absorb or transmit the power efficiently, then the transition slows down. So in many ways, the grid is the backbone of the energy transition in the region. So it determines how fast renewable energy can be integrated, how resilient the system is, and how effectively the countries can participate in cross-border power trade. So if we're talking about urgency, then strengthening the grid infrastructure is absolutely foundational.
Yeah, I also think that most importantly, grid development need to keep pace with the development plan. We see that planned network development in a number of countries, not only in Asia, but Europe too, are out of step with energy ambitions. So grid development must be urgently addressed, particularly as this infrastructure would need longer timescale than generation development. Otherwise, there will be increasing risk that some clean energy projects might become obsolete.
Right. And the interesting thing is when I started as an energy analyst back in 1990, which is a long time ago, already there'd been talks about the ASEAN grid. And I think they'd already been talking for like 20 years. But seemingly in the last 2, 3, 4 years, there seems to be a real momentum and some of the connections are really happening. Do you have any views on that, or do you want to maybe unbundle that a little bit?
I think as the energy issues become increasingly important in the region these past years, there have been, I would say, ASEAN power grid champions, with, of course, Singapore and Philippines at the center of it. Because Singapore would need to import clean energy from other countries, so they would need these interconnections to happen. And Philippines, being the ASEAN chairmanship for this year, is also prioritizing the development of subsea cable connection and the ASEAN power grid. So, and we also see a lot of financiers are interested in investing into the region. But, of course, project bankability is still an issue in ASEAN, and we need to find ways to make projects are profitable, not only for investors, but also for the government.
Right. So that struggle is going to continue for a while. Annual investment has to actually increase, I believe, something like fourfold from current levels to meet the regional goals. Which ASEAN member states face, do you think, the most significant hurdle in closing this massive financing gap?
So as Ember, we usually look at the region as a whole. And from what we see from a regional perspective, ASEAN member states currently are at different stages of energy transition. So financing needs and challenges differ in both scale and nature. So some countries requires large volume of capital because of the size of their energy system, say Indonesia, for example, and demand growth, while others may not face the same scale issues but need more targeted support. So rather than focusing on any single country as facing the most significant hurdle, I would frame it as a question of access and alignment. So the emphasis should be on ensuring that all the countries have access to a broad set of financing instruments and that they can draw on depending on their transition and the strategies they would want to put in place in the near future.
Talking about a few some country-specific questions, perhaps, very quickly. Obviously, we can't go through every country around ASEAN and the rest of Asia, but I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of things referring to China, Japan, and the Philippines specifically. On China currently provides the largest volume of energy finance to the region. How can ASEAN countries best manage the debt sustainability risks associated with these large-scale infrastructure projects?
Yes, we also see there's risk associated with the increasing debt by the ASEAN countries. So I think for ASEAN, it's best if the countries recognize the cost of sovereign borrowing as an effect of greater climate ambitions. Countries also need to realistically set the economic growth target versus interest rate to understand the impacts of these loans. So this is where climate risk assessments, energy transition, and policy revisiting should be taken into account when assessing debt sustainability. For example, co-financing models with local players or MDBs could reinforce the important role of concessional development finance, reducing debt risk. And we see the impacts of just energy transition partnership for Indonesia is set a pool for energy finance and then allowing smaller local players to participate in the energy transition.
And in addition, we also saw the need really for ASEAN countries to prioritize projects with clear and reliable revenue stream, and also to avoid locking in long-term liabilities associated with high emission assets, which later on could expose countries to stranded asset risk in case of future policy shifts.
Got it. Moving on to another kind of, I guess you could call it a player around the region, Japan. Japan usually emphasizes strategic development and technical capacity building, and it's been, I believe, very active around the ASEAN region, including Indonesia, of course. How does this approach improve long-term grid resilience compared to simple generation projects?
Yes, so my personal take for Japan is that they are very smart in preparing the workforce to be familiar with their technology, and thus would have Japanese technological preference. So Japan has also long been prioritizing smart grid applications. The country is expanding its transmission network by high-voltage direct current lines and upgrading the traditional weak interconnections. So technical capacity building done by Japan is definitely key to ensure long-term grid resilience, and particularly to the Japanese context, smart grid is closely associated with smart communities. So this could be a narrative for ASEAN too, to emphasize the social effect of transformation and highlighting the need for smart grid application.
Got it. Just moving on to the Philippines real quick. The Philippines 2026 chairmanship in particular, you view the 2026 ASEAN chairmanship by the Philippines as a critical platform for action. What specific policy should the Philippines prioritize to align regional capital flows?
Yes, indeed. We view like Philippines as a chairmanship as a critical platform for action. The 2026 ASEAN Summit theme is navigating our future together, and we saw it as a good opportunity to put regional coordination and clean energy front and center. Supply chain and infrastructure becomes more regional. The Philippines can use its chairmanship to facilitate technical exchanges and encourage practical cooperation, such as improving regional data transparency on project pipeline, advancing interoperable certification and standards for clean technologies and components, and exploring mechanisms to aggregate the demand for clean technology. We believe that even incremental coordination can reduce the transaction cost and enhance investor confidence, particularly in the markets where early stage risk remains high.
Great. One last, let's call it top-down question, and specifically about the grid, which we already referred to. So the ASEAN Power Grid, financing initiative aims to enable cross-border integration. What is the biggest non-financial barrier to completing a truly integrated regional grid?
Yes, thank you, Yosef. So ASEAN Power Grid goals is amazing if it can be realized in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Absolutely agree. Yes.
Yes, but the largest non-financial barriers would probably be policy adjustment from national to local level. So the ASEAN Grid Interconnection Plan might be announced at the regional level. However, its implementation might need policy adjustment at the national and local level and harmonization with various ministries and institutions. So if we can say an example, interconnection plan between Indonesia and Singapore requires the project to be formally categorized, for instance, as a national priority for Indonesia. It must also obtain approvals from the Ministry of Maritime Affairs for submarine cable, the Ministry of Public Works, and relevant local government agencies. So there's a whole breadth of complexities in the government agencies and institutions that need to support this interconnection plan.
Right, got it. Now moving on to the capital flows, mechanics, etc. And I've got a question about the US blended finance approach. So the US focuses on de-risking projects to mobilize private capital. What happens for regional project pipelines if US multilateral funding continues to shrink, and the likelihood that it's going to shrink in the very short term is very high?
Yeah, in our assessment, U.S. multilateral funding typically comes in the forms of grants and guarantees that helps de-risk early stage development. So if this support shrinks, then definitely it could reduce bankability of clean energy projects on emerging economies. It slows down the flow of private capital towards those projects and ultimately delaying project implementation and transition across the region.
Yeah, I don't think that that particular outlook is extremely bright, but it could create more opportunities. I mean, when there's challenges, there's also opportunities. Looking at something else, you warn in the report against ASEAN getting locked into the low value end of the clean energy supply chain. What specific high value activities should the region be targeting to ensure long-term economic gains?
So Indonesia is rich in mineral resources, and the government has been putting in a policy to ban the raw nickel material exports in the past years. So I think that ASEAN could invest into high-value activities. For example, battery storage manufacturers are increasingly investing in the regions. So the region could establish local production lines for solar parks with batteries. And other countries have also attracted European and Chinese companies. However, we need to develop more local talent. We need to nurture a clean energy startup ecosystem and providing seed fundings. So this would enable homegrown industries to compete with established global players and have customer and user customer ready products.
And Dinita, just to follow up, are there any countries, as far as you know, in ASEAN that are actually starting that up a little bit more aggressively than others? I mean, I know that, for example, the Philippines, the Department of Energy has been working very closely to a whole bunch of entities, including UNSCAP, of course, ADB, et cetera, to do this kind of capacity building. But are there any one country or more that you think really stands out, or it's really something that is in the, let's call it, work in progress stage?
Do you mean the talent nurturing?
Yes,
in the
the
region?
capacity building, the education, the teaching, yes.
Yeah, so actually a lot of development partners in the region have been focusing on the TVET education, and there are some workshops dedicated for early career energy researchers, workshops on energy modeling. But I think as a structural change needs to be made in our academic curriculum, in terms that it needs to be aligned with what the world needs. It needs to embed more energy transition stories, more energy skills, and energy modeling.
I not only 100% agree, but if there is such a thing as 300%, I 300% agree with what you said. I think we need to adopt. I think few people understand that the energy transition is really like learning a brand new language, and you need a multidisciplinary approach. Now, us who are in the ecosystem, so to speak, we know that you need to be, I mean, I'm a financial analyst by background, but I got to understand engineering a tiny bit. I mean, the engineering behind clean energy, for example. I don't have to build it myself, but I got to understand the mechanics because it's different. I need to look at the legal context in different countries. I need to look at the policies in different. So you've got all these, even if I was just as a financial analyst, I need to look at all these other disciplines, and you need a multidisciplinary approach. And that takes a kind of new mindset with education, whether it's at university or workshops. And now the other thing that I get very concerned and sometimes frustrated about is this silo approach. You can do a course on carbon. You can do a course on, I don't know, climate bonds. You can do a course, but there isn't like a fundamental course that gives you the basics on how to learn the language and how to speak the language.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that because of this lack of awareness among the educators, there's a lot of like sleeping talents lying in Southeast Asia, but also in other Asian countries, right, that would not be able to understand what energy transition is, except they've been exposed to the practice and to the work that they need to be doing.
Yes, absolutely. I think we could have, 2 points. One is the mission of Asia Climate Finance is exactly this, to raise awareness and to educate on climate business and climate finance issues. And the other thing is that I personally, it's like my mission to raise this awareness from a multidisciplinary approach. But we could definitely have one or more podcasts just on the subject of education. Moving back to your report, which is the focus today, one more question on kind of the financial side of things, and it's about risk allocation and private capital. So private finance currently flows only where revenue structures are established. How can governments better allocate risks to attract more institutional investors into early stage projects?
Well, first and foremost, I think you and Dinita have highlighted the important aspect of making sure that there is like clear policy signals and stable regulatory guidelines. Since policy uncertainty is one of the biggest barriers for investors, especially in early stage projects in emerging economies. But after that, we saw that government can better allocate risk by absorbing or mitigating those that are for private sectors that are equipped to manage. This can include providing guarantee to reduce counterparty risk, like Philippines has their guarantees right now provided by Bill Guarantee, offering strong project preparation support to reduce development and construction risk, and ensuring transparent and predictable cost recovery mechanisms to address revenue risk. One thing that we keep on hearing from private utility companies, and enabling long-term PPA to provide a stable cash flow, something that Vietnam is already like incorporating in their PPA finance structure.
Understood. Just one last question before we get into the outlook side of things. You mentioned in the report that harmonized standards for batteries and solar components could reduce friction. Why has regional standardization proven so difficult to achieve in the past? And I appreciate that we're talking about 11 sovereign governments, 11 ways of doing things, et cetera, et cetera. But here we're really talking about a basic of basics, which is harmonizing standards for batteries and solar components.
So in the past, there have been heavy national protectionism measures. For example, Indonesia has local component requirements for solar and wind project, right, of minimum about 20%, 50%, or some even attempt to put it at 40%. This high threshold may increase costs, delay projects, code development if the supply chain is limited, and also it's difficult to harmonize the regional standard with its local content requirements.
I must add that even it's difficult, like ASEAN has proved that it is possible, but on different like components. So for example, we have the mutual recognition arrangement for electrical and electronic products that allowed the product that are tested and certified in one country to be accepted in other countries. So this reduced the compliance costs in making product circulation easier in the region. So we saw that this approach could also be applied in solar and battery components as well. This could be a precursor to that.
Understood. Talking about the outlook, and a couple of questions, forward-looking questions. ASEAN must strategically balance speed, scale, and sustainability. And many ASEAN countries have high dependence on fossil fuels. What are the decarbonization paths? And also, if I can ask, what final advice would you give regional policymakers looking to combine Chinese, Japanese, and US financing models?
I can start with the decarbonization path. I think ASEAN countries could benefit from diversifications of energy sources. And most realistically, they need to have a whole system change because most countries are heavy reliance on fossil fuels. They have a centralized power system. So decentralizing some of this system and adding more distributed energy generators, rooftop solar, adding storage and smart grid could really help countries to achieve these decarbonization goals.
And diversification, not just in energy, but also it also applies in financing action. It is also a key. So we saw that each model, whether it's from China or Japan or US or other bilateral partners, they bring distinct advantage and trade-offs as well as we outlined in the report. So we thought that policymakers should also avoid over-reliance on one single source and instead design frameworks that can integrate multiple financing approaches in a complementary way. That has been the huge highlight of the report. So bilateral and multilateral finance can play a catalytic role, particularly in early stage or higher risk project. However, the long-term objective should be to strengthen our domestic regulatory framework, to deepen our capital market, and create a bankable pipeline so that we can crowd in private capital to finance more clean energy transition at larger scale.
That's great. And again, the report titled Leveraging Global Capital Towards Clean Energy, ASEAN Races to the Summit, we'll have a link in the show notes for that report, which will take you to the Ember website, which has enormous amount of information, of research and data. Well, Alnie and Dinita, thank you so much for answering all of my questions and talking about the report. Just one final thing, which we started a few episodes ago, and that's just recommendations. So I'm not sure if you have any recommendations for listeners. I mean, it can be books, reports, studies, film, documentaries, events, or anything else. Maybe start with Dinita. Do you have any recommendations?
Yes, I have several recommendations. So Ember just published a report on AI in the power system, which is authored by my amazing colleague Lam. And then I have another recommendations of documentary called Sexy Killer. It's about how coal entrenchment has been very heavy in Indonesia. And a last recommendation would be a book on Indonesia called State of the Art Indonesia Transition. And it's actually the one that I authored myself.
Oh, okay. Well, it must be very good then. And we'll have links to all of these recommendations from Dinita as well in the show notes. Alnie?
Yes, I think right now I've been watching with the evolving conflict of US and Iran. I've actually been watching documentaries on US-Iran relations. There is one, and there's actually two that I just watched from YouTube. This is by PRT World, and the other one is Frontline PBS series. So it just gives a really clear sense of the historical conflict, which I think is essential for everyone trying to follow what is happening today and how it would impact us in the coming years, especially us in the region. Actually, we're planning to develop a paper on this topic, right, Dinita? So we also encourage your viewers to keep on the lookout in our social media for any future updates.
Great. And we'll also have links to these two YouTube documentaries in the show notes. And I'll make sure, actually, now that I think about it, get your book, Dinita, so I can read it, and we can exchange book commentaries. You can comment on my book and I comment on yours, or discuss it. Maybe that again is another idea for another podcast. So Dinita and Alnie, really thank you very much for taking out some time out of your day to talk to us at the Asia Climate Finance podcast. It's been a really great conversation, and thank you so much for answering all of my silly questions about your report.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Yes, we're very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please note that the Asia Climate Finance podcast is provided for educational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Any information discussed should not be relied upon for making investment decisions. Listeners should always seek advice from a suitably qualified and authorized investment professional. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of their current or former employers or of the podcast host or producers.